and untouched by the kinds of knowing that destroy a man from within. Boone Slater froze. For the first time in years, fear wrapped itself around him. The woman he had chosen to protect himself from knowledge had come not to preserve his ignorance, but to strip it away. She would teach him the one truth he had spent half a lifetime escaping, and there was no door in that house, nor in his soul, strong enough to keep it shut. The church itself had stood like a weary sentinel on the edge of town, where the last buildings surrendered to barren land. Boone had arrived alone, his horse tied at the post, his coat buttoned tight though the day simmered with heat. He had chosen his cleanest shirt, not for romance but because the bargain demanded at least the appearance of respectability. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memory. 3 witnesses sat scattered in the pews, faces unfamiliar, summoned by law, not by choice. Their presence was perfunctory, their gazes indifferent. The preacher waited at the altar, Bible worn thin in his hands, his expression vacant of curiosity. This was not the first time he had joined strangers with desperation in their eyes. It would not be the last. Callable entered with no music, no veil. Her dress was simple, gray fabric mended too many times, the color of smoke and distant storms. She walked with no hesitation, no eagerness either, her steps quiet, precise. Boone turned toward her and caught details that startled him. Her face, younger than her letters had suggested, bore eyes far older, eyes that had seen beyond their years. Her hands held nothing, and yet those dark stains beneath her fingernails told stories he could not decipher. She reached the altar, and the preacher began the ritual. Words about unity, duty, permanence, all hollow against the silence that lingered between them. Boone glanced at her again. Her lips moved faintly, not in prayer but as though she counted seconds, breaths, or perhaps distances between thresholds. When asked if he would take this woman, Boone answered swiftly. Hesitation would have implied doubt. Doubt would have implied feeling. And he had arranged this marriage to avoid both. When Callable's turn came, she paused exactly 3 seconds before speaking. That pause settled in Boone's bones like a cold wind. Something shifted between them, something he could neither name nor escape. The papers were signed at a small table near the door. Her handwriting struck him immediately. Sharp, exact, educated, unexpected. The witnesses scrawled their names and disappeared from his memory as quickly as they had appeared in his life. The preacher collected his fee with the weary air of a man who no longer expected hope to survive these unions. Outside, Boone untied his horse and turned to see Callable already walking away, bag in hand, toward the edge of town. She did not wait. She did not ask. She simply moved in the direction of his land as though she had always known where to go. They walked side by side in silence through empty streets. Windows stared like blind eyes, and townsfolk observed them without greeting. The town fell away, leaving nothing but endless land stretching outward. His ranch stood 2 miles beyond the last building, isolated by intention. Boone had chosen the distance carefully, carving solitude from the world. To him, isolation had never meant loneliness. It had meant control. The house loomed, larger than one man required, its fences and sheds silent testimony to years of labor done without witness. Callable stopped and studied it. Her expression was unreadable, her silence heavier than words. For a long moment she simply looked, calculating something unseen. Then, without waiting for him, she walked on, crossing the threshold of a house scrubbed clean but still unwelcoming. Boone followed, his steps slower, as though with each footfall he entered not only his own home, but also a life he had not prepared to live. Inside, the air was cooler but not kinder. The main room stood neat, organized by the discipline of a man who had lived too long with nothing but routine. Callable set her bag down by the door, then moved through the house slowly, her eyes lingering on corners and walls as though they whispered secrets only she could hear. And Boone Slater, for the first time since arranging this marriage, felt as though the house did not belong to him anymore. Her fingers trailed across the room like a quiet searchlight, brushing the back of a chair, pausing on the edge of the table, gliding across the windowsill that framed only empty land. She moved as if each surface whispered to her, as if she was reading the house the way others read scripture, drawing knowledge not from words but from absence, from what was missing as much as what was present. Boone lingered near the stove, watching her with the unease of a man caught between expectation and reality. For months, in letters and in his own imagination, he had envisioned this moment, his wife entering his home. In those daydreams she had been meek, grateful, quiet. But Callable was none of those things. Without hesitation she opened cupboards lifting sacks of flour, jars of coffee, strips of dried meat. She studied his provisions with an expression not of curiosity but of judgment, as though she was cataloging his choices and finding them lacking. When she discovered the bottles of whiskey neatly arranged beneath the counter, she paused longer, her lips moving silently as if counting each one. She closed the cupboard door without a word, but the silence felt heavier than speech. Boone cleared his throat, the sound too loud in the stillness. For the first time since they had entered the house, she turned her gaze toward him. Her eyes were darker than he had realized, so dark they swallowed the lamplight, almost black in the dim room. She did not smile. Neither did he. The quiet between them stretched taut, like a rope drawn to the edge of breaking. At last he spoke just to sever the tension. "Your room is upstairs. First door. I haven't been inside." She tilted her head slightly, regarding him with the same measuring look she had carried all day. "Why would you go in it?" He had no answer, none that didn't sound hollow. He had prepared the room, yes, but he had not truly believed the day would come when a woman stood in his house, real and solid, asking questions he had not rehearsed replies for. He gestured toward the stairs and she nodded once before ascending. Her footsteps were light yet deliberate, floorboards creaking faintly above him. He listened as she set her bag down, opened a window, paced across the boards as though testing the strength of the walls. When she returned, the sun had dropped lower, and shadows had deepened across the room. Without asking, she approached the stove and began preparing food from his supplies. Her hands moved with practiced ease, efficient and sure, each gesture deliberate. Boone sat at the table and watched, his eyes fixed on her stained fingernails, on the confidence with which she cut and stirred, on the dissonance between the desperate woman of her letters and the competent stranger now commanding his kitchen. He wanted to ask where she had learned those movements, what she had done with those hands, why the words in her letters had sounded like submission when the woman before him radiated control. But he did not. Questions felt like dangerous doors, and doors once opened could not be closed again. They ate in silence. The food was simple, but better than anything he had tasted in months. When the plates were clean, Calla carried them to the basin and washed them herself, pumping water, drying them on a cloth with quiet efficiency. Boone remained at the table, struck dumb by the strangeness of another person inhabiting his house, his space, his silence. Outside, night had fallen completely. The windows turned black, reflecting only the lamplight within, dark mirrors framing two strangers. Boone realized with a sudden cold weight in his chest that he had no script for what came next. The contract was fulfilled, the ceremony performed, but no contract could tell him how to navigate the living of it. Calla dried her hands, turned and looked at him, her face unreadable in the shifting lamplight. Then she spoke for the first time since dinner. "It is time for bed. We should go upstairs now." The words hit him harder than he expected. He rose slowly, climbing the stairs behind her, each step dragging, heavy with the sense that he was being pulled into a moment he could neither control nor avoid. The narrow hallway at the top was lit only by the lamp she carried, its flame casting restless shadows against the walls. She stopped at the first door, the one prepared for her, and opened it. Inside was a room as plain as his letters, a narrow bed with clean sheets, a dresser, a single window looking east into the vast emptiness. She set the lamp on the dresser and surveyed the space with the same assessing calm she had applied to his cupboards. "This is where I sleep," she said. Boone lingered in the doorway. "That is correct." She crossed to the window, looked into the dark beyond, then turned back to him. "And where do you sleep?" "Down the hall. Last door." The lamplight carved her features sharper, the hollows of her cheeks deeper, her eyes darker still. She studied him until he wanted to look away, but pride rooted his gaze in place. "That is not how marriage works," she said, her voice steady, without argument or plea. Just fact. Boone's jaw tightened. The arrangement was clear. "You have your space. I have mine." She stepped closer, her movements slow, deliberate, and the scent of her reached him, an herbal sharpness mixed with something warm and human. She tilted her head back to meet his eyes. Smaller in stature than he had realized, her presence far larger than her frame. "The arrangement was clear about many things," she said softly. "But you left others unspoken. Why?" Heat rose in his chest, confusion and anger tangled together. "I owe you no explanations on our first night." She smiled then, a strange, sorrowful smile that unsettled him more than any words could. "You're right. You owe me nothing. But I have seen your hands, Boone Slater, at the altar, at dinner. I know what scars say even when men don't." He stiffened, breath caught. "How would you know anything about that?" She stepped forward, reached out, and before he could pull away, she took his hand, turning it palm up. Her touch was gentle, yet it left him no escape. The old scars across his knuckles lay exposed in lamplight. Wounds healed poorly, broken skin mended and broken again. "I know," she whispered, tracing the marks with her fingertip. "Because I cared for my father while he destroyed himself slowly. 2 years of watching pain carve him hollow. I learned every kind, pain from outside and pain that comes from within. And yours, husband?" She lifted her eyes to his. "Yours comes from within." Boone jerked his hand back, retreating a step into the hall. "This conversation is finished." "No," she said, her voice calm, unwavering. "It is not. You didn't bring me here for company or children or help with the ranch. You brought me here because you thought innocence could protect you. But I am not what you imagined, and tonight you will understand that." She brushed past him, moving down the hall toward his room without invitation. Boone stood frozen, every instinct shouting at him to stop her, to reassert the distance he had sworn to keep. But his body betrayed him. His feet refused to move. His throat refused to form words. By the time he followed, she was already inside, lighting the lamp beside his bed. Warm light spread through the room he had occupied alone for 5 years. His sanctuary felt suddenly smaller, invaded, transformed. She opened his dresser, her hands finding the bundle of dried herbs he had kept there. She lifted them, frowned, and shook her head. "These are wrong. They make it worse, don't they?" He shut the door behind him, the room tightening around him like a trap. "What are you doing?" Ignoring him, she unwrapped a small cloth bundle from her pocket. Inside were fresh plants, green leaves alive with scent. Their fragrance filled the air, both clearing and clouding his mind. "I'm going to help you," she said simply. "But first, you'll need to take off your shirt and lie down." Boone stood stiffly by the bed, feeling like a trespasser in his own room. His hands moved reluctantly to his buttons. Each slip of fabric undone felt like surrender. When he finally lay on the bed, bare chest exposed to cool air, he had never felt more vulnerable. She had shed her gray dress while his back was turned. Now she stood in a thin nightgown, the lamplight drawing out the shape of her frame, the fabric worn nearly transparent in places. Her hair fell loose, shadows clinging to her shoulders. She sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under her weight, closing the distance between them. He caught the scent of crushed herbs mixed with her own warmth. Dipping her fingers into the paste she had ground, she lifted them for him to see. "This will burn," she warned. "But it will help?" His voice came rough. "Help with what?" Her hand pressed firmly against his chest, directly over his heart. The paste burned cold, then hot, then deeper, as if reaching places no hand should touch. "With the pain you carry," she said softly. "The pain you hide in your hands, in your scars, in your silence." He stopped breathing. "You wanted a wife who knew nothing," she continued, her eyes fixed on his. "But what you fear most is to be known. Someone hurt you so deeply you believe understanding itself is dangerous. You think knowledge is a weapon, so you searched for ignorance instead. A woman who could share your house but never your truth." His jaw tightened. "You know nothing about me." Her other hand traced the scars on his knuckles with the herbal mixture. "I know you hit things until your hands break. I know you drink until the world blurs. I know you built this house too large, then filled it with emptiness because emptiness feels safer than company. And I know you sleep with your door unlocked because you want someone to find you, while praying they never do." "Stop," he whispered, but it was weak. She did not stop. Her hands moved across him, marking him with green fire, reading him like a book he had hidden even from himself. "I told you," she murmured, her voice low and unwavering. "I cared for a dying man for 2 years. I learned how to recognize pain. And I see yours, Boonslater, clearer than you ever wanted anyone to." He drank to numb the memories of war. He tore at his own flesh to replace guilt with pain, as if agony could silence the ghosts that followed him into every night. "I learned to read destruction, Boone. I learned to see it in the small movements, in the hands that shake when they should be still, in the eyes that search for escape even in peace. And you, husband, you are drowning in it." Boone tried to push himself up, tried to break the moment, but her palm pressed firmly against his chest. Her hand looked delicate, fragile even, but it held him down with an unexpected strength. His muscles could have broken the hold easily, yet he did not. He could not. His body was not paralyzed by her weight. It was paralyzed by her words, by the unrelenting truth she spoke aloud. "You wanted innocence." Kalla's voice was steady, measured, almost clinical, "because you thought innocence meant passivity. You thought I would nod when spoken to, remain silent when not. You thought I would obey without question, never look beneath the surface you present. But I am not innocent, Boonslater. I am educated. I am observant. And I have spent 2 years tending to people who fought against their own healing. People who hurt themselves because they did not know how else to live. Her fingertips traced a scar across his shoulder. His breath caught. That one he remembered too well. Barbed wire clutched until it cut, blood spilling only to remind him he was still alive. How did you know about that one? His voice cracked against the silence. He had never told a soul. Because men who wound themselves leave a pattern, she whispered. Pain writes itself in repetition, in rhythm. Because scars are a language and I learned how to read them. And the moment I stepped into this house, I saw a man hiding behind walls so high, so thick, that he would rather marry a stranger than face the ruin alone. The herbs burned hotter now against his skin. His flesh tingled as if fire licked beneath the surface, blood rushing to the mark she touched, every nerve raw, exposed. Calla leaned closer, her face hovering inches from his, her breath warm where his skin cooled from fear. The thin nightgown shifted with her movement, soft fabric brushing against him, and he forced his eyes to remain on hers, dark, steady, unflinching. His body betrayed him, responding in ways he hated, but her words terrified him more than her nearness. So tell me, husband. Her voice dropped, low, almost tender but edged with steel. What are you so afraid of? What truth has hollowed you so deeply that you decided knowledge itself was the enemy? Boone's chest tightened. In that instant, lying bare beneath her gaze, he understood. Calla was not the meek, grateful bride he imagined. She was a blade, honed and deliberate, and with every word she was slicing open the defenses he had forged across 5 long years. The silence grew heavy, suffocating. Her hand pressed against his chest, the heat of the herbs spreading like confession through his blood. His throat burned. His eyes stung, and for the first time in 5 years the words escaped. The truth he had buried so deep he almost believed it was gone. Her name was Margaret. His voice was hoarse, broken. We were engaged for 2 years. She was the daughter of a banker, educated, beautiful, everything a man was told to want. Calla said nothing. She did not move, did not soften or recoil. Her hand remained steady against his chest, her eyes holding him still. She was not waiting for her turn to speak. She was absorbing, drawing every word like medicine to be measured. 3 weeks before the wedding, Boone's voice faltered. I came home early from the ranch. I walked into my room and found her. With the foreman I hired that spring. A man I trusted. A man I paid. They weren't hiding. They didn't even hear me come in. I stood in that doorway and watched, and something inside me broke in a way that never healed. The last word split, jagged in his throat. He despised himself for the crack, for the weakness it revealed. Calla's fingers spread across his chest as if her palm could gather the fragments of him and press them back together. What did you do? She asked softly. Nothing. His lips twisted bitter. I walked away. I called off the wedding. I fired the foreman. I sold everything I owned and bought this land as far from town as I could find. And I told myself, his jaw clenched, that if a woman could smile at me while planning betrayal, then knowledge itself was the weapon. That ignorance would be my protection. Calla shifted closer, her dark hair falling around them like a curtain, shutting out the world, until only his confession and her breath remained. So you chose a woman who knew nothing, a woman untouched by life, a woman who would obey because she was grateful, who would never question because she had no ground to stand on, a woman who could not hurt you because she would not know how. His throat closed. He nodded once, unable to form words. Her eyes searched him, not with cruelty but with sorrow. Sorrow for him, for the prison he had sealed himself inside. But you were wrong about innocence, she whispered. You thought it meant ignorance, weakness, safety. You thought if I had never known another man I could never compare you, never find you lacking, never choose someone better. But innocence is not ignorance, Boone, and virginity is not stupidity. Her hand left his chest, moved to his face, cupping his jaw with fingers that smelled of earth and crushed leaves. Her thumb traced the sharp line of his cheek, and he found himself unable to retreat, unable to lift the walls that had protected him for so long. I came to you untouched, she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. Not because I lacked opportunity, but because I had seen too much. I watched my father destroy himself after my mother's death. I watched love rot into obsession, grief sharpen into punishment. I learned that giving yourself to another person is the most dangerous choice a human can make. So I kept myself separate, safe, alone. Her words struck like a mirror, reflecting his own fears back at him. Something shifted between them, a recognition that both of them had been running from the same wound, only wearing different masks. But you cannot live your life in chains, she continued, her breath brushing his lips now. You cannot marry to avoid intimacy. You cannot bury yourself in silence and call it safety, because eventually loneliness becomes heavier than the risk of being hurt. Boone's chest burned, his breathing shallow, the herbs on his skin searing hotter, though he could no longer tell if the fire came from the plants, her nearness, or the raw truth she poured into him. Her eyes glimmered, dark but not empty, close enough that he could see flecks of lighter brown, close enough that her warmth stirred against his mouth. Why did you really agree to this arrangement, Calla? His voice was a whisper, torn between fear and need. For the first time, her expression shifted. Something unguarded flashed across her features, quickly veiled but not hidden. Because when my father died, he left nothing but debts, she admitted. Because the men in town looked at me like cattle to be bought. Because you offered distance, and distance felt like safety. And now, her voice broke slightly, softer now. Now I am lying in bed with a man I married this morning with my hands on his scars, speaking truths neither of us ever meant to reveal. And I realize, safety is only another kind of prison. Her gaze locked with his. And now I understand you and I are far more alike than either of us wanted to believe. The silence that fell between them was no longer cold. It was no longer a wall. It was a fragile bridge, stretched between two people who had built their lives out of fear. Yet, for the first time, both stood in the same place. Two people stood on opposite sides of the same wound. Calla's palm stayed against his face, steady and deliberate, not demanding, not hesitant, only present. Boone felt himself lean into the warmth of her hand before he could stop the motion. So slight he might have denied it, but she caught it. She caught everything. You break your hands when the memories grow too loud, she murmured. His throat worked. When do they grow too loud? At night, he admitted, voice rough. Always at night. When the house is silent, when nothing is left to keep my mind busy. She nodded as though she'd studied grief as carefully as she had studied medicine. Her fingers slipped down to his hand again, lifting it into the lamplight. The skin bore scars, knuckles split, healed poorly, broken open again and again. Evidence carved in flesh. This one is fresh, she said softly, her thumb brushing the rawest mark. Within the week. He didn't ask how she knew. 5 nights ago. Couldn't sleep. Went to the barn. Hit the beam until everything else stopped. Her gaze deepened as she lifted his hand closer, as though deciphering a difficult text. And then, unexpected, uninvited, her lips touched the ugliest scar. Not a kiss, not desire, but recognition. A bearing witness to pain, more intimate than anything his body had known in years. His breath stuttered. She looked up through her lashes, mouth still pressed to his ruined skin. Pain is not your enemy, Boone, she whispered. Fear is. You hurt yourself not because of pain, but because you're terrified of hurting someone else, of wanting someone you might lose, of the moment control slips and another person's choice could undo you. He swallowed hard. How can you know that? Because I lived it, she answered simply. She rolled her sleeve back. In the lamplight, faint lines crossed her inner arm. Old scars, pale now, but deliberate once. They stared at him like confessions. Not deep enough for death, but deep enough to prove intent. His chest ached at the sight. After my father died, I had nothing left. No money, no family, only men circling me like vultures. I thought if I marked myself, if I ruined myself, no one would want me. If I couldn't control my world, I would at least control my body. But you stopped, he said. His voice carried both relief and grief. She lowered the sleeve again. Yes, because I realized I was surrendering to fear. Every cut gave my despair more power. And then I chose differently. I chose survival, even if survival meant marrying a stranger. For a long moment, they stared at one another across flickering lamplight. Two souls who had tried to outrun pain, only to find mirrors in each other. Something cracked inside him then. One of the old walls, the ones he thought indestructible. Calla must have seen it because she shifted closer, climbing onto him, the thin fabric of her nightgown brushing against him, her weight anchoring him to the moment. He froze, body responding instinctively, but she pressed both hands flat to his chest. I'm going to teach you something, she said. His voice was hoarse. What? How to let someone care for you without destroying it. She reached for the bowl, scooped the herb mixture and worked it across his chest, shoulders, collarbone. Her touch was firm but careful, not invasive. Each motion intentional, mapping every knot of pain, every old wound, and slowly the tightness in him eased. His breathing deepened. His eyes slid closed. For the first time since Margaret, he allowed a woman's touch to bring him something other than fear. This isn't control, Calla whispered, circling the tension out of him. This is trust. You're letting me see you. Letting me touch you. letting me hold knowledge and choosing not to believe it will be a weapon. And if it is? His eyes opened, searching her. Her hand stilled, then moved again, steady as ever. Then you'll learn that not everyone is Margaret. That risk is the price of connection, that the only alternative to pain is loneliness, and loneliness is another kind of death. The words sank into him as her dark hair fell loose around her face, lamplight framing her like something half real. He realized then, the woman he had married for ignorance was teaching him knowledge was not destruction. It was survival. The herbs cooled against his skin, leaving a heightened awareness in their place. Her hands moved down his arms, tracing scars he had forgotten he carried. Each touch was excavation, a gentle unearthing of truths he had buried for too long. When she finished, she set the bowl aside, but didn't move away. She stayed astride him, her weight grounding him, shadows from the lamp swaying across the walls. He lifted his hands carefully, slow enough to give her the choice. She didn't move. His scarred palms found her waist. Her warmth bled through the thin fabric. His thumbs moved without thought, small circles against her side. I don't know how to do this, he said, voice breaking. I don't know how to be married to someone who sees me. Kayla covered his hands with hers. No one knows how at first. Marriage isn't knowledge. It's choosing to try. And if I fail? If I hurt you the way I've hurt myself? Her eyes softened, something gentler than he had ever seen in her gaze. Then I'll tell you. And you'll stop. And we'll try another way. That's what partnership is. Not perfection. Not safety. Just staying. The knot in his chest loosened. For the first time, he let it loosen. Tell me about your father, he whispered. She was quiet, her gaze reaching past him into memory. He was good before the war, strong, gentle. He carried me through town on his shoulders like I was treasure. But war broke something no one could see. He came back with wounds no doctor could bind. He drank, worked himself raw, tried every escape except asking for help. And I watched him shrink every day until when he died, my grief came with relief. And that relief nearly destroyed me. Boone's hand moved to her cheek, mirroring her earlier gesture. I'm sorry you carried that alone. Tears welled, but she blinked them away. The control of someone who'd rationed grief too long. Those 2 years taught me medicine. How to ease pain. How to spot surrender. How to read what people hide. My father's dying gave me knowledge I never wanted but cannot unlearn. That's why I could see you so easily. When I saw you at the altar, she continued, your jaw locked, your shoulders drawn too straight, your hands hidden like you were ashamed of them. I knew you were fighting yourself. And I thought maybe what I learned watching my father die could help me save you. He drew her down until her forehead touched his, their breaths mingling. You didn't come only to escape debt, he said quietly. Maybe not. Maybe I came hoping that saving you would save me too. They stayed like that, foreheads pressed together, breathing as one. Two damaged souls choosing connection over silence. Stay here tonight, Boone whispered. Not in the other room, here with me. Her eyes searched his face. Are you sure? No, he confessed. But I'm choosing it anyway. That's what you said, isn't it? That marriage is choosing even when you're unsure. She smiled then, a real smile, and it transformed her face. Yes, that's exactly what I said. And I choose it too. Morning broke golden and soft across the room. Boone woke slowly, piece by piece. Warmth at his side. Weight of an arm across his chest. The shocking steady truth that he was not alone. Kayla lay curled against him, her dark hair spilling over his shoulder, her breath even in sleep. He stayed still, afraid to disturb the fragile, precious thing that had formed between them. When her eyes finally opened, she found him watching. For a moment, silence held them. Then she smiled, that same luminous change he had seen the night before. Good morning, husband. Good morning, wife. The words carried new weight, not duty, not transaction. Truth. She sat up, the sheet sliding to her waist, sunlight gilding her shoulders. She reached for his scarred hand, turning it over in the morning light. Her fingers moved gently across the damage. These will heal better now, she said softly. Not because the scars will vanish, but because you won't make new ones. He searched her face. How can you be sure? Her gaze didn't waver. Because now you have a reason to keep your hands whole. Someone who will notice. Someone who will ask why. And that changes everything. Boone let the truth of it settle inside him, recognizing how deeply it rang. The urge to punish himself had always struck hardest in the silence of night, when darkness offered cover and no one was there to see. In those hours, pain felt distant, consequences a fading echo, but now he was no longer unseen. Now there was a witness. Now there was Kayla, who would not let him unravel in secret, who would not allow his ruin to remain hidden. What happens now? He asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. "We cannot stay in bed forever," she replied. She laughed then, a laugh that pierced the room like sunlight forcing its way into a long-shuttered space. "No, we cannot. You have a ranch waiting for you, and I have a house still unexplored. And beyond this night of honesty, we have a marriage to build. Something real." She rose, drifting toward the window. The morning light fell across her figure, illuminating the thin gown that draped her, painting her in warmth and gold. Boone watched her, something stirring within him that he thought had long been buried. Not the desperate clawing need for control that had driven him to seek a bride untouched by life. Not the paralyzing fear that had kept him apart from the world for 5 long years. No, something gentler, quieter, something that carried the fragile weight of hope. Kala turned back, her hand extended toward him. "Come, show me everything. The barn where your fists bled. The locked rooms you won't enter. The places where memory drives you into hiding. I want to know it all." He accepted her hand and let her draw him from the bed. Together they dressed, silence stretching between them but no longer strained. Already it was shifting, softening, becoming the comfort of 2 people learning to share a space. When they descended the stairs, the house itself felt altered, smaller somehow, less fortress, more home. The morning air outside was cool and sharp, clean against their lungs. Kayla walked beside him, her hand steady in his, her steps sure on ground that was new, yet seemed already hers. At the barn, she paused before the support beam scarred with the violence of his fists, his blood embedded in its grain. She lifted her free hand, laying her palm against the rough surface as though she could feel the history left there. "No more," she whispered. "When the nights press in too hard, you wake me. When the memories come, you speak them aloud. When the pain feels too much to bear, you let me carry part of it. That is the vow we made, even if you never spoke the words." Boone's gaze lingered on the beam, his jaw tight, before he finally released her hand. He crossed to the wall of tools, lifted the weight of the axe with practiced ease. Its heft was familiar, but his purpose was not. Kayla did not move, did not speak, as he returned to the beam and took his stance. With one brutal swing, the blade split deep into the wood, tearing through the dark stain his blood had left. Again and again, each strike shattered what remained of his self-destruction. The sound echoed in the barn, not as violence but as declaration. When at last the ruined section lay splintered across the dirt, he let the axe fall from his hands. Kala stood watching him, tears coursing silently down her face, her lips curved in a smile that trembled with relief. He went to her, gathering her close, holding her tightly while she pressed her face to his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt. They went back inside hand in hand. Boone led her straight into the kitchen. He crouched to open the cupboard where she had found his bottles the day before. 6 of them, lined in a soldier's row. 5 years of numbed nights, 5 years of quiet surrender. He brought them out one by one, setting them in neat order on the table. The light struck through their amber contents, the glass gleaming like mockery. He lifted the first bottle, holding it as though he could feel the weight of what it represented. Then he walked to the door, hurled it hard against the rocks outside. The crash was sharp, violent, echoing across the land. He returned, took the second, then the third. Each time he smashed the glass, the sound cracked like chains breaking. Kala stood beside him, silent but steady, handing him the bottles one by one until none remained. The ground outside glittered with shards, a graveyard of his old survival. His chest heaved, but for the first time in years, he felt lighter. Upstairs, they paused outside the door of the room he had said would be hers. He opened it, and together they stood at the threshold. The bed was neatly made, the dresser polished, the window eastward facing. Yet despite the order, the room was hollow, built to hold distance, not intimacy. "You don't have to stay here," Boone said, his voice rough. "Yesterday I thought separate rooms meant safety. I thought isolation was protection. I was wrong. If you want space, I'll give it. But if you want mine, if you want ours, this door will never be closed to you again. Not tonight. Not ever." Kayla studied his face, her eyes steady, searching. "What changed?" she asked. "Everything," he said without hesitation. "You changed everything. You saw what I've tried to bury, and you didn't run. You touched what I believed was too broken to mend. You stayed when you could have walked away at any moment in the night. That choice deserves truth in return." Her hand rose, fingers grazing the stubble along his jaw. "I choose to stay," she said softly. "Not just last night, every night after. Your room, our room. No more separation." And then he kissed her. Not the hesitant touches of the night before, not shadows and uncertainty, but light and intention. This was a kiss of mourning, of deliberate choice, sealing a promise rather than testing possibility. When they finally broke apart, breathless, he leaned his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to be a good husband," he admitted. "I have no example, no guide, but I want to learn. We'll learn together," she whispered back. That's what partnership means. The morning stretched before them, spent in quiet labor side by side. Boone showed her the breadth of the ranch, the corral, the sheds, the equipment, and for the first time, he sought her opinion. She listened, closely, her questions thoughtful, her insights sharper than he expected. At midday they shared a meal, comfort blooming between them like something earned, not given. Later, Kayla unpacked her single-worn bag, carrying her belongings not into the room meant for her, but into his, into theirs. Boone stood in the doorway, watching his solitary world transform into shared space, and felt no fear, only relief. By evening they stood together on the porch, watching the land stretch into the horizon. Boone wrapped an arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, fitting against his side as though she had always belonged there. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now we build a life," he answered. "Not one shaped by fear or by control or by hiding from pain. A life shaped by choice, by choosing each other, even when it's hard, by waking each other when the nights grow heavy, by being known, fully, and trusting that knowledge will never be turned into a weapon." Kayla turned in his arms, her dark eyes holding his. "That," she said softly, "sounds like a good marriage, maybe the only kind worth having." Boone Slater had once searched for a bride untouched by experience, convinced that innocence was the only shield against betrayal. But what he found instead was a woman who shattered every assumption he had built his life upon. Kayla taught him that protection was never born of ignorance, but of trust, that safety was not in distance, but in closeness, that the truest strength was not in hiding wounds but in allowing someone else to see them and stay anyway. The scars on his hands would mend now, not just because time would heal them, but because he no longer carried them alone. The whiskey bottles were gone, smashed into glittering fragments on the rocks outside. The barn beam that had absorbed his self-destruction was split apart and left behind, and the room he had once prepared as a wall between them now stood empty, while in its place they began to build something real. Only 24 hours after a ceremony neither had believed in, Boone and Kayla stepped into the true beginning of their marriage. Not an arrangement of necessity, not a contract bound by law, but a partnership carved from honesty, sealed by vulnerability, and strengthened by the courage to risk pain for the chance at something greater, something like love. If you were moved by this story, click the video on your screen to experience another unforgettable tale where courage and vulnerability collide in ways you never imagined. And don't forget, subscribe, and consider leaving a super chat to help us continue bringing you powerful stories like this. Your support means the world to us.